bigger picture at play, a new world order. Canada is watching David Conahan. New York City, 1980s, gold glass, red carpets, mirrored ceilings, and one man standing at the edge of financial ruin. Donald Trump. Big name, big buildings, bigger debts. American banks are getting nervous. The numbers don't add up, the shine is wearing off, and suddenly, the phone doesn't ring as often. But other money, from other places, starts to flow. Not from Main Street America, but from networks that grew out of the old Soviet shadows. Money that doesn't care about your ethics, only your usefulness. We don't need to imagine secret smoky rooms to understand the effect. Real estate became a global laundromat. Tower by tower, deal by deal, Western vanity wrapped around Eastern power. That's where the roots were planted, where the bigger picture at play first took shape, Western greed, meeting authoritarian opportunity. Decades later, that same man, rescued again and again by foreign cash and foreign flattery, would become president of the United States. And the world would pretend, for a while, that this was all just an accident. Scene Q, a bit more urgent, but controlled. When Trump entered the White House, people said, "Don't worry, the institutions will hold. The courts, Congress, the press, they'll keep him in check." And to some extent, they did. Judges pushed back. Officials resigned. Journalists exposed scandals. But while the tweets and chaos grabbed the headlines, something deeper was happening. The system itself was being tested, probed, stress-tested. Loyalty tests on intelligence agencies. Attacks on judges as enemies. Friendly words for strongmen, and open contempt for Democratic allies. This wasn't random. It was a pattern. An experiment in how far a modern democracy could be bent, without quite snapping. Then came COVID. Slightly darker tone, a once-in-a-century crisis, a virus racing across the world, millions of lives on the line. And how did the leader of the most powerful democracy on earth respond? Not with calm, steady, truthful leadership, but with denial, mixed messages, conspiracy winks, and propaganda-style spin. We heard talk that sounded more like authoritarian playbooks than public health, downplay the danger. Blame others. Attack experts. Turn science into a culture war. We still don't know everything about the origins of COVID, and we should be honest enough to say that. But we do know this: when the crisis hit, the response from the top echoed the style of regimes that fear truth more than they fear death counts. The message to the world was clear. If you can confuse enough people, if you can turn reality itself into a partisan battlefield, even a pandemic can be turned into a political prop. Authoritarians watched and took notes. And then came January 6th. Scene Q, solemn, steady. The day that was supposed to be boring, a formality, a peaceful transfer of power, became something else. We saw a mob, fueled by lies about a stolen election, storm the U.S. Capitol. Windows smashed. Offices ransacked. Gallows set up outside. Confederate flags and extremist symbols. Moving through halls that once held debates about liberty and law. That was not tourism. That was not a misunderstanding. It was an attempted hijacking of the democratic process, live on camera. For every oligarch, every autocrat watching from Moscow, from Beijing, from elsewhere, the lesson was obvious: the Western system can be turned inward against itself. You don't always need tanks, if you can weaponize belief. The bigger picture at play was coming into focus. Scene Q, now shift to Ukraine and Russia, firm but compassionate. While America was tearing itself apart, Russia moved to the next phase of its own plan. This didn't start in 2022. It started in 2014, with the seizure of Crimea. It continued with a grinding war in the Donbass. And in 2022, it exploded into a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The excuses changed by the week: security concerns, protecting Russian speakers, denazification. But underneath the slogans, the reality is simple. This is a war of empire and theft. Russia wanted land, resources, and control over a neighbor that dared to choose Europe, democracy, and self-determination. Ukraine refused to kneel. They fought back. Hard. Kyiv did not fall in 3 days. Ukrainian cities did not fold. Instead, Ukrainian soldiers held the line, citizens volunteered, and the world watched a smaller country stand against a larger invader with courage and clarity. Russia expected fear. They got resistance. And once again, the authoritarians adapted. If they couldn't win cleanly on the battlefield, they would try again at the table. With papers. With clauses. With peace plans. Scene cue, analytical tone, but emotional undercurrent, that's where the 28-point peace plan comes in. On the surface, it sounds thoughtful, even noble. Words like non-aggression, security guarantees, rebuilding, tolerance, cooperation. But when you read the details, the mask falls off. Let's lay it out in plain language. This plan caps Ukraine's army at 600,000 troops, while Russia keeps its full war machine untouched. Bans Ukraine from joining NATO forever, and forces NATO itself to promise it will never admit Ukraine. Ukraine is locked in a gray zone, too weak to deter Russia, barred from the only alliance that could protect it. Recognizes Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk as Russian de facto, even by the United States. Land taken by force, ethnic cleansing, terror, all turned into new normal. Freezes the front lines in parts of Kherson and Zaporizhia, giving Russia de facto recognition there too. Forces Ukraine to pull back from part of Donetsk, creating a so-called demilitarized buffer zone that the plan still lists as Russian territory. Imagine being told to retreat from your own land, and then trust that the same Russia that invaded you won't just stroll back in later. That's not peace. That's a surrender document with polite fonts. Then comes the money. The plan reintegrates Russia into the global economy. Talks about lifting sanctions, case by case. Even suggests bringing Russia back into the G8, as if being a democracy no longer matters. Frozen Russian assets? Here's how the plan wants to use them. $100 billion go into a US-led reconstruction fund for Ukraine. The United States takes 50% of the profits from that investment. Europe adds another $100 billion. The remaining frozen funds are funneled into joint U.Est, Russian investment vehicles. So Russia gets its money back, through friendly structures. Trump's America takes a big cut. Ukraine gets investment conditions instead of clean, unconditional reparations. And then, the most obscene line of all, full amnesty. All parties involved in this conflict will receive full amnesty, and agree not to make any claims or consider any complaints in the future. In one sentence, this plan tries to erase massacres, torture, deported children, bombed apartment blocks, destroyed hospitals, deliberate attacks on power grids, for years of daily terror. No war crimes. No trials. No justice. Just signatures, contracts, and profit sharing. Call it peace, and move on. Slower, heavy but clear. So let's be absolutely honest. This 28-point blueprint is not a peace plan. It is a reward for aggression. A financial package for elites. A death sentence for justice. And a time bomb for future wars. Russia gets the territory. Trump's circle and their partners get the money. Ukraine gets a piece of paper. Europe gets the bill and the risk. And war criminals get a clean slate. That is the new world order they're trying to sell you. Scene Q, zooming out, analytical but passionate. Now, zoom out even further. Look at the geometry of power. Russia wants land, buffers, and a fractured West. China wants a distracted America. Tied down in crises. Arguing with itself. Too divided to focus on the Pacific. In the middle, you have a politician who owes his image and survival to a long history of questionable foreign money, publicly praises dictators more than allies, sees every crisis as a chance to brand, to profit, to settle scores, and is now fronting a plan that turns stolen land into legal borders, frozen assets into revenue streams, and war crimes into past misunderstandings. Call it multipolar realignment. New World Order. It doesn't matter. Under the branding, the core logic is simple. Authoritarian states want to normalize a world where tanks redraw maps, propaganda rewrites memory, and justice is negotiable if the price is right. And they need collaborators in the West to seal the deal. Politicians who are happy to sign. Business elites who see opportunity, not horror. Media ecosystems that drown truth in noise and outrage. That's the bigger picture at play. Scene Q, firm, hopeful, more personal. It would be comforting to say, if we just remove this one man, everything goes back to normal. But the comments under Jake's videos, the rallies in Europe, the silence of certain institutions, tell us something else. There is a split. On one side, ordinary Americans who are ashamed, angry, and still picking up the phone to call their senators. Europeans who feel betrayed, but are stepping up anyway, sending weapons, sending aid, and saying, if Washington won't lead, we will. Ukrainians powering phones off car batteries, filming reports in the dark, living through blackouts and missile strikes, and still saying, we will not surrender our land, or our future. On the other side, leaders who treat Ukraine's survival like a real estate deal. Negotiators who can look at mass graves and see nothing but complications to be managed. Commentators who call surrender pragmatism, and amnesty for war crimes a necessary compromise. That is the real New World Order on offer, not East versus West, but those who still believe in accountability, against those who think everything is for sale. Scene Q, bringing your voice as Big Dave/Canada is watching net. From a little mountain in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. I, David Conahan. Watch this unfold. I run a small channel called Canada is Watching Net. I don't have tanks. I don't have billions. I don't have a seat at any negotiating table. But I do have a voice, and so do you. We can refuse to call this surrender peace. Refuse to accept amnesty for mass murder as a business footnote. Refuse to let any leader trade long-term security and justice for short-term profit and headlines. We can stand with Ukraine's red line, our land is not for sale. Push our governments, in Canada, in Europe, in the United States, to support Ukraine not just with words, but with weapons, with aid, with real guarantees. Demand that war crimes courts do their work, no matter who finds that inconvenient. The New World Order they dream of is not inevitable. It only becomes real if we go quiet. Final scene, strong, inspiring. So here's my message, from a Canadian on a small mountain. To anyone listening in Ukraine, in America, in Europe, anywhere. The bigger picture at play is this: either we accept a world where dictators can buy forgiveness and rewrite borders with bombs, or we decide, here and now, that some lines cannot be crossed, and some crimes cannot be washed away. Ukraine has chosen its side with blood and courage. The question is, will we? Slava Ukraini. Glory to the heroes. And to every defender of democracy. In every country. Stay awake. Stay loud. And don't sign away the future. To people who think justice is just another line item in a 28-point deal. This is Canada is Watching Net. I'm David Conahan. And trust me, we are watching.